Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today we're going to be having a look at the Wright Brothers, but from a very unique perspective. We're going to look at the Wright Brothers after Kitty Hawk, after they'd flown their aircraft. What became of them? Did they achieve financial success? Did they become rich and famous? Did they get the recognition they deserved? Or did the fates conspire to thwart their ambition? We'll be looking at all that today. But in doing so, we need a little bit of background perspective here. Remember, the Wright brothers fly in December 1903. By 1905, they seemed to have it all. They enjoyed a total monopoly on heavier-than-air flight. They had the only functioning airplane in the world, and they were the only two guys that were capable of piloting it. They had even applied for a patent covering the concept of flight itself. How was it then that by 1910, their aircraft would be surpassed by many of their competitors, and by the mid-1920s, they'd be out of the airplane manufacturing business entirely? More importantly, though, what effect did all of that have on the Wright brothers? We'll be looking at all those issues today. Let's begin by going back to the flight itself. Headline, Minneapolis Journal, Saturday, January 2nd, 1904. This is 2 weeks post-flight. The successful boy airship inventors are the son of Bishop Wright of Ohio. Tacoma Daily Ledger, January 8th, 1904. Aerial navigation now a fact. Successful Aero Auto. And that's what they called the plane in the newspaper, an Aero Auto. Built by Wright brothers, a genuine flying machine. Initial experiments described by Wilbur Wright. Operator reclines horizontally, rudder in front of the machine. All very true. It says here, when the flying machine built by Wilbur and Orville Wright of Dayton, Ohio, made a 3-mile flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December 17 last, aerial navigation became a fact. The box kite-like structure, which carried a man 3 good miles, was under perfect control and was not held suspended in the air by a balloon, all of which is true. And how safe would flight become? Well, according to the Dayton Daily News, and Dayton is their hometown, it's going to be as safe as in a steamer will be the passengers of the Wright airship when it has been perfected. The brothers are now on their way home and are bringing their invention with them. Machine ascends from Earth without aid. 6 days post-flight, the world is informed that the Wright brothers have flown. But by December 21, 1903, only 4 days post-flight, the basic conflict is set out here in an article by the Dayton Daily News. What are you going to do with the airplane? And what are the Wright brothers going to do with their plane and their patents? Headline, Wright Flyer badly wanted. By who? By Uncle Sam, who is tired of experimenting with Langley's bird models. That requires some explanation. Professor Langley was a director at the Smithsonian Institute, and he was fooling around with airplane models of 1896 to 1903. And he built a thing called a Langley Aerodrome, and it was promoted by the Smithsonian Institute. He had 3 public trials to get this thing in the air, and it never flew. All right, so as far as the Wright brothers are concerned, and the public was concerned, it was a dead issue. But it says here the government has been in communication with the Wrights, and it is said the same overtures to them that were made to Professor Langley, who thrice failed to make a successful test of his buzzard. I don't think I'd call my plane a buzzard if I was the inventor, but that's what Langley did. But the government's going to offer him the same terms, but are they going to accept it? No, because what's going to happen is from 1903 to 1906, the Wright brothers are basically going to go to ground. They're going to go under. Nobody's going to see their plane, and they're not going to really talk about it. What they are going to do is hire the best patent attorney they can, and they do. Here's an article, the Journal News of Hamilton, Ohio, May 22nd, 2006, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the patent on the Wright machine. It says here, U.S. patent number 821393 was an important milestone in the history of the airplane and the lives of Dayton's most famous brothers. It says the brothers credit attorney Henry Toolman for creating a loophole-free description of the Wright's method for controlling a flying machine. And that's the key here. They patent the concept of flight and the mechanism by which you maintain control, not the actual airplane itself. It says here what the Wright brothers wanted to do was patent their airplane. But Toolman talked them out of it. What Toolman did was patent the control system. You can't fly an airplane unless you can control it in the air, and he patented the control system. It says here, Toolman based his patent not on the powered and now famous 1903 Wright Flyer, the Kitty Hawk plane, but the simpler 1902 glider. The glider used the exact same control system as did the powered aircraft, and so they used the simpler model in establishing their patent. It says here, what really mattered to the Wright brothers was defending the quality of their achievement. That was what the Wrights are all about here. You're going to see throughout this story that they're keen on that. They want credit, proper credit, not academic credit, but proper credit for their invention. And they want a reasonable amount of financial success. Now, from 1903 to 1906, for 3 years, the only public display they make of their airplane is at a thing called Huffman Prairie. It's basically a farm 8 miles outside of Dayton. And he invites the notables, the good and the great of Dayton, Ohio, to have a look at his airplane. And they do fully controlled flights up to 30 minutes in time. And are able to control their plane, the pitch, the yaw, and the roll for up to a half hour at a time without any problem whatsoever. The one thing they don't allow are reporters with cameras. Reporters are invited, but when they're told not to bring their cameras, they don't come. The reporters don't even come until the last day of the exhibition, by which time the machine has been put away and there are no photographs. The fact that there aren't any photographs of the plane in flight leads the public to a great extent to think that the Wright brothers are in effect frauds. The newspapers have a term, and is are you flyers or are you liars? Because they've been shown no proof that these flights have actually occurred. For the first 3 years, the Wright brothers going to ground, and their level of secrecy is understandable while the patent is established. The patent is not fully granted until 1906. But even at that time, they're very reluctant to show their machine in public because they fear that somebody will be able to glean the mechanism by which their plane flies and will be able to produce their own. And while technically that would violate the patent, they realize that the lengthy and expensive nature of patent litigation, they don't want their plane displayed until the absolute last minute. As a matter of fact, in their negotiations with the Army, and they do get into military negotiations, they don't even show pictures of the plane to the military. The only thing they give the military are the names and addresses of the witnesses of the notable people of Dayton who observed the plane back in 1905, and they're expecting the government to act on that to the tune of $25,000 an airplane, and it just isn't going to happen. When it's going to happen is 1908. They finally feel that they're ready and prepared to demonstrate their machines, and they take their machines to Paris and to Washington, D.C. Wilbur goes to Paris, where he becomes a sensation. Here's an article from the Patriot News, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, August 10, 1908. Wright brothers conquer the air. French press united in praise of the Americans. They are declared the leaders. The French press unites in spontaneous and enthusiastic praise of Wilbur Wright's performance with his airplane Saturday at Le Mans, same town as the race, and unhesitatingly expressed the opinion that even in this short flight, it was undoubtedly proven that the Wright brothers are the leaders in aerial navigation. Headline, monoplanists concede superiority. Monoplanists are fellows who want a plane with one wing as opposed to the Wright brothers that have two wings. And their champion is the aviation expert. It says here, Blériot, the monoplanist who witnessed the flight, frankly admitted that the Wright machine is far superior to anything yet invented. But here's the problem. But wait a little while, added Blériot. In a short time, Wright will be equaled, perhaps surpassed, for aviation will make greater progress than people imagine. And it'll make greater progress than especially the Wrights would imagine. They always felt that they had at least a 5-year head start on anybody, that there wouldn't be any serious competition till 1912, 1913, but they were wrong. In the meantime, they have demonstrated that their plane works, and according to the Anaconda Standard of October 1, 1908, orders 50 machines from Wright Brothers. It says here, Lazare Welfer, the French aeroplane promoter, announced today that he'd given an order to Wilbur Wright for Wright Brothers for the construction of 50 Wright airplanes. The amount of the contract is $100,000. As successful as Wilbur is in France, Orville is in Washington, D.C. His plane demonstrations are a sensation. However, airplane flight at this stage is extremely dangerous. Headline, September 19th, 1908. Orville Wright's photograph. Orville Wright's wrecked airplane. Wright's chances good, expected to recover. Recover from what? Well, from a terrible crash. He broke his leg and 4 ribs, but more importantly, Thomas H. Selfridge was killed in the crash. Selfridge is the namesake of Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan. So air flight at this point in time is incredibly dangerous. But by 1913, before World War I commences, more than 400 aviators will have died in test flights around the world. A dozen or so people will die flying the Wright machines. There is no, well, the technology is extremely primitive. The dangers are extremely real. Now, that doesn't stop people from investing. We mentioned that earlier they'd received an offer of $100,000 to make planes in France. That offer gets upped. In the Journal Tribune in Knoxville, Tennessee, December 20th, 1908, Wright Brothers patents in France. They're selling patent rights to French manufacturers. And it says here, it appears that the meeting was of a most amicable nature, and the payment of $500,000 to the Wright brothers immediately was voted unanimously. So a French company is going to pay $500,000 for the right to produce Wright machines. However, it says the contract provided that it was contingent on 2 flights of 50 kilometers each, and they'd have to be performed within a day. And that further, the contract provided that 2 persons should be carried in the machine in addition to petrol sufficient for 200 kilometers. So you had to show that the flights were worthy. They were airworthy to that extent. And those flights never took place. So while the promise was for $500,000, no money ever changed hands with the French in this situation here. Meanwhile, as predicted by Blériot, the rest of the world is catching up. By 1906, a Brazilian Santo Dumont flew 700 feet, just in a straight line, but he's up in the air. Louis Blériot was perfecting his monoplane. He'd eventually, by 1910, crossed the English Channel. And still the Wright brothers waited, and they again felt they had the 5-year head start. As I mentioned before, they're negotiating with the U.S. military. They refused to show the machine. Not even photos of the machine. And with respect to business, this explains as much as anything about the Wright brothers. Wilbur Wright is quoted in 1907 from one of his friends saying, "I want the business to be built up so as to get the greatest amount of money for the least amount of work. Sell a few machines at tremendous profit so that we can close out." They never looked at this thing the way William C. Durant would at General Motors or Henry Ford would. They didn't want to rule the world and become billionaires and control the airplane industry. They want recognition and a reasonable return on their investment, enough to be comfortable. It almost seems more of a British attitude than an American attitude. If you look at almost every other story of inventors and developers in the late 19th, early 20th century, they tend to be the Thomas Edison type who want to, if not monopolize, certainly dominate multiple markets. That is never that at no point in time is that the Wright brothers' intention. The world is catching up, as we say. Here we have an article of August 2nd, 1909 in the Tennessean of Nashville, Tennessee. Air races to show prowess. 5 nations in August to meet in France. There were two air shows that summer. There was one in France and one, strangely enough, in Ohio. It says here, the Wright brothers didn't like the rules and will not compete, but Glenn Curtiss will be there as America's representative, and Curtiss would become the Wright brothers' nemesis, and his planes were fast on their way to becoming the best in the world. In the air show at Reims, France, there are 23 planes from 5 nations, and broke all the records with respect to both distance and altitude. You know, it must have been very similar to, if you ever see the movie, Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines, have a look at the airplanes in it. In doing research for this article, it became evident that for that movie, the producers built more than 20 exact replicas of early 20th century airplanes and flew them in the movies. It's probably the single best demonstration of early aviation that we have out there. Now, in the Ohio race, the Democrat and Chronicle, Rochester, New York, September 2nd, 1910 notes, it is significant that the first airplane flight over one of the Great Lakes should be made from Ohio, the home state of the Wrights, and by an aviator who is probably their most formidable rival. Thursday flight by Glenn Curtiss from Euclid Beach, Cleveland to Cedar Point, a distance of 60 miles, is said to be the record for an airplane journey over water. So while the Wrights are tinkering with their machine, their competitors are out there doing real things with real machines. The Wright brothers were to a degree stubborn as well. They had a very unique and difficult method of controlling their aircraft. Well, let's contrast. We have here, for example, The complicated control system, which required the pilot to manipulate 3 different levers with 2 hands, was never modified. By contrast, Curtiss airplanes had one integrated control wheel and a system of straps attached to the pilot's upper body that controlled cables to move the aileron, while Blériot's planes had the stick and rudder arrangement that is standard on airplanes today. They never modified. They were so keen on their patent, they wouldn't infringe on other people's patents or pay license fees, even if using the other person's patent would have improved their plane, which it would have in this instance. So what do? The Wright brothers are losing their ability to compete with the competition in the air. So what do? They go to the courts. Headline, Evening Star, Washington, D.C., August 22, 1909. War of the Aviators. Papers in the Wright suit filed at Buffalo. Claims of the brothers say all flying machines come under their patent. Remember, they patented the concept of flight, not flight, the plane itself. Long legal battle imminent. Present case, the beginning of a court contest destined to equal famous telephone litigation. Alexander Graham Bell's stuff of the 80s took forever to sort out, and it looks like the airplane world is going down that same road. The fundamental question, and here it is as succinctly stated as we can get, the fundamental question involved is whether or not the Wright patent covers all forms of rudder for guiding that plane, whether such rudders are really a part of the main plane or not. It was for the warping of the main planes of the machine so as to maintain lateral balance in the air that was patented. The concept is wing warping. Modern day planes today use ailerons, flaps that go up and down. You raise the flap here, it causes the plane to bank. You make your turn. The Wright brothers did it with actually warping the end and the end of the wings, pulling on cables and causing the end of the wing to turn to cause the banking. Would that hold up in court? It says here in the article, the claim is a broad one. Their claim is just about as broad as though all wagons had gone on runners and somebody had then invented a wheel and claimed a basic patent on all wheel traffic. That is exactly what they've done. But what would the courts do with it? Would the courts uphold it? Because if they don't uphold it, what do the rights have? If the patent is not valid, if the patent was drafted too wide and is not valid, they're bankrupt or they're ruined. They have no business. So let's see how it plays out. But before it does, what you have to realize is that Wilbur was the expert that the Wright brothers relied on in court to clearly and succinctly state the principles of flight. He had to explain that to a judge and jury who had never heard of the concept of flight before. And he was incredibly effective, and he won. They won at trial, but it gets appealed, and it goes up to the Court of Appeal, and that's what really That's what really counts. What's the Court of Appeal going to do with it? In the meantime, tragedy strikes the Wright brothers as Wilbur develops typhoid in 1912 and dies. He dies at the age of 45, not even knowing whether or not the patents are going to hold and whether his brother and the company are going to be able to continue. But despite what might seem the Occam's razor kind of analysis here, when you read the article outlining how broad the patent is, you sort of get the impression that the newspaper believes that it's far too broad, and that kind of a patent is going to hurt the development of airplanes in America, and so they come down fairly hard on the side of Curtiss, but Court of Appeal doesn't. They affirm the decision in the airplane suit. Judge Hazel's ruling restraining manufacturers of Curtiss airplanes is upheld by the Court of Appeals. It says the United States Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed today the decision of Judge Hazel in the Federal District Court in Buffalo, enjoining the Herring Curtiss Company from manufacturing the Curtiss airplane on the grounds that it was an infringement of the patents of the Wright brothers. They're told they can't even make their plane. The Curtiss guys are destroyed, or should be destroyed, or could be destroyed, depending on what at this point, what Orville Wright wants to do. The manager of Wright Aeronautics states at the time, in no time Curtiss could have been closed down or bought up. We would have been in a totally different development of flying, starting here and spreading to Europe exactly as the telephone monopoly did. At any rate, it did not happen because one man, Orville Wright, he didn't want that. Can you imagine Henry Ford turning down an opportunity like this, or William C. Durant, or Thomas Edison turning down an opportunity to crush his opponents? But it turned out all Orville wanted was recognition that he was right, that he was responsible for flight, that these were in fact his patents, and all he wanted was a reasonable payment for his product. And he negotiated something. He negotiated initially a tariff rate with Curtiss, but then subsequently allowed himself to be bought out of the Wright Brothers airplane manufacturing itself for the sum of $1.5 million, and he's out. He's voluntarily going back to Dayton, Ohio with the equivalent of $45 million in hand, and that's all he wanted. He got his recognition and he got financial security. Now, the company itself continues on. And before he goes out the door in 1915, he still demonstrates that he's a heck of an inventor. Here we have the Cincinnati Enquirer, January 4th, 1914. Wizard Orville Wright demonstrates foolproof aerial device which is expected to revolutionize method of warfare. And this article has three interesting things on it here. First off, at the top left, it has a picture of Orville Wright's house under construction, which would be subsequently named Hawthorne Hill, outside of Dayton, Ohio. But what he talked about in the article, he's demonstrating here a seaplane, and he's also talking in here about, basically, it's a pendulum-driven control device, kind of an autopilot. Now, it was highly effective in counterbalancing the problems they were having with their guidance system. But it would even be replaced within a few years by a gyroscopic control system by another manufacturer. But for a while, Orville was back on top with a really good idea. Now, the company, when Orville Wright leaves the company actually starts doing a little better. He's not a businessman. He never said he was. The Wright Aeronautic Company gets involved in the production of aeronautic engines. They become one of the world's best manufacturers of motors for airplanes. And that is a position they maintained throughout the 1920s. An article that lets you know that time marches on is the May 22nd, 1923 article of the Dayton Herald that says the basic patents of Wright's are up. And in 1923, the 20-year patent on his basic design has lapsed, and now the concept of flight with the control mechanism as put in the patent application are now public. So anyone can start their own airline or air manufacturing companies. The unthinkable happens though in June 27th, 1929. Curtiss merges with Wright. Here's the headline: $70 million air merger up to stockholders. Wright, Curtiss, and 10 other companies in latest combine. Creation of the largest aviation company in the world through merger of Wright and Curtiss interests was proposed to stockholders today. So the companies, now Orville doesn't have a say in this, but the companies that were at each other's throats for nearly 20 years merge with the Wright company going on to manufacture most of the engines and the Curtiss company manufacturing the airframes. But what happened to Orville Wright, and what kind of life did he have after he cashed in his chips? I'm going to suggest that he had the exact kind of life he would most wanted. He became an honored, recognized individual, celebrated basically at every turn. And I'm going to give you some examples here. Here's an article from the Macon Telegraph, Macon, Georgia, December 11th, 1928. Orville Wright honored at Mammoth Celebration. Says here, Orville Wright, who braved the jeers and scoffs in the early years of his flying experiments, tonight received the highest honor of a grateful city, proud of his achievement of its first citizen, winding up a full day's celebration in which thousands of persons who knew the Wrights as neighbors and fellow townsmen participated with officials of the city of Dayton, Ohio, in presenting the world's aeronautic pioneer with a gigantic testimonial. Well, wonderful celebrations there. We're in the 25-year anniversary of the concept of flight. Another article from the Dayton Daily News, Dayton, Ohio, April 8th, 1923. Unveil monument in memory of Wilbur Wright next Sunday in Indiana City. Newcastle, Indiana is dedicating a park and a monument to his late brother. And these sorts of things are happening all across America, especially in that special year of 1928. Here's an article from the Baltimore Sun. Notables mark birth of aviation. Secretary of War pays tribute to Wrights at Kill Devil ceremony. Cornerstone is laid. Government memorial started. The giant cenotaph at Kill Devil Hill. Hopefully we have a picture of that for you here. In honor of the Wright brothers. It actually looks like something that would have been set up as a World War I memorial for the fallen. But in this case, it's set up in honor of the Wright brothers and their monumental achievement. It wasn't all rosy. It wasn't all 100%. Let's say it was 97.5% rosy for Orville Wright throughout the 1930s. The one thing that did stick in his craw. Remember back, we got the Langley Aerodrome. Well, the Smithsonian Institute insists on displaying the Langley Aerodrome with the comment that it was the first machine capable of flight. It never flew. But what happened was, in 1914, the Curtiss Company went over and borrowed the Langley Aerodrome and made significant modifications to it and got the airplane to fly a little bit. It barely flew, but it got to fly just a bit. The Smithsonian then took it upon themselves to say that this was the first vehicle capable of flight and presented it as a predecessor to the Wright Flyer. The Curtiss Company, of course, was motivated by their patent litigation at the time. We're hoping to prove that the concept of flight existed before the Wrights flew in December 1903. Nothing ever came of it in the patent world, but it really ticked off Orville Wright. As a matter of fact, well, here's what we have. Here's the article. First plane probably will stay in England, says Orville Wright. And what happened was he was touring England with the Wright Flyer when word of what the Smithsonian was going to do with Langley came out, and he just left the plane there and donated it temporarily to the London Science Museum. The Smithsonian's actions ticked off more people than just Wright himself. On August 20, 1940, in the Dayton Herald, headlines: urge congressional inquiry over insult to first plane. Ringing demands for congressional investigations of the insult to the Wright brothers' first plane by the Smithsonian Institution in failing to give full recognition to the Dayton inventors for their priority in flight was heard Monday afternoon. And who would be speaking on the Wrights' behalf? Well, none other than Major General H.H. Arnold, Hap Arnold, chief of the Air Corps and an early pupil of the Wrights. He declared, "We must erase that insult which base ingratitude drove our first airplane to a home abroad where it would be properly labeled and recognized for what it is, the first successful flying machine." So he's got General Hap Arnold on his side, pitching for the Smithsonian to back down from their stupid position and allow the Wright machine to take its place of honor in front of the Spirit of St. Louis at the Aviation Museum. One of the only other things that bothered him was the fact that, like Mr. Nobel and his Peace Prize, his invention had been used for warlike purposes. In fact, there's an article here of the McAllister News Capital, McAllister, Oklahoma, December 29, 1944, with a diagram showing that the new B-29 Superfortress, now bombing Japan, was wingtip to wingtip actually further than the Wrights' first flight. That, while an absolute fact, wouldn't have made Orville Wright very happy. He was certainly anti-war in his sentiments. So what would happen? Would Orville Wright ever see the resolution of his dilemma with the Smithsonian Institute? The answer is no. He dies in 1946 of a heart attack, and his passing is mourned throughout the nation. And it isn't until 1948, November 19th, 1948 to be exact, that the Langley Buzzard incident is finally put to rest. Headline: the Kitty Hawk is coming back to stay today. Nearly 45 years after it introduced the air age by soaring briefly from the ground at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the famous airplane Kitty Hawk returns to America Day after a 20-year sojourn in Britain. So the plane comes back. It's now on display at the Smithsonian, where it always should have been. 2 years too late for our man Orville Wright, but there for all to be seen in one of the world's great museums. Well, how do you define a life well lived? What was important? Is money the only way to measure your worth? Is proper recognition what you need? Well, the Wrights, and especially Orville, the money was important only to the extent that it could provide security, and certainly Orville got enough money for that. Now, neither of the Wright brothers ever married. When Wilbur died, his sole heir was Orville. When Orville goes, well, he's got a sister. That's all. He never married. He wanted money for security. He wanted proper recognition. He got the recognition both in the courts and from the public, and eventually even from the Smithsonian Institute. He received honors and accolades, parks, monuments, even stamps are named after him, have his likeness. Did he live like a gentleman? Did he live the life he wanted? Well, he built Hawthorne Hill, one of the most beautiful homes in the Dayton, Ohio area. He received people. He did what a Mark Twain or somebody did. The good and the great from around the country, be they academics or industrialists or politicians, came and visited with him at Hawthorne Hill. And Hawthorne Hill still stands in his honor. It was a heck of a life well lived. And I think both Wright brothers there were some trials and tribulations along the way, but both Wright brothers got exactly out of their life what they wanted. So let's celebrate the Wright brothers with an appropriate cocktail, the Wright Flyer. This is a big, interesting one. And before you say, wait, that's too big, this is to make two. Okay, this recipe makes two. You get a teaspoon of simple syrup, 6 dashes of Angostura bitters, 1.5 ounce of Applejack. An Applejack is an apple-based moonshine. 1.5 ounces of Fernet Branca for bitterness. 1.5 ounces of grapefruit juice for even a little more bitterness. 1.5 ounces of Aperol for some sweetened bitterness, and 1/2 ounce of dark rum. Now you put that in a tall glass over ice. Mix it thoroughly. Stir it about 40 times to get the temperature down in proper dilution. Then strain it out into two coupe glasses. Now, coupe glasses are those 1930 champagne glasses with the wide rim. Split it between the 2 coupe glasses and add an apple slice for each. All right. Now enjoy your Wright Flyer, and raise a glass to Orville and Wilbur. We'll be back next week with another episode. Remember that if you like the content, like and subscribe. It's very important for the development of the channel. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you again next week.